Alright guys, I'm trying out some new software to try to get the explanation that you would have gotten for your evaluating evidence paper this morning in class to you over the web through Angel or through YouTube. So I understand that the software says ScreenFlow demo over the top of it, but what's most important is the audio explanation that you're hearing, not so much what you'll see, although the two work together well. So the ScreenFlow demo is not an error, and it will not mean that you can't get the explanation of the assignment. What you're looking at right here is the Evaluating Evidence assignment sheet. This is available for you on Angel, but let's go over it together real quickly. To demonstrate your mastery of the skills covered in this unit, both in your text and in lecture, you'll compose your first formal written project. Adhere strictly to the following guidelines and pay close attention to the example presented. After I go over the guidelines, I'll show you an example essay in order to understand your assignment. Your paper will be awarded 130 points, which is more than a test, divided below. The paper is due Tuesday, April 12th. If you've been to Angel recently, you've noticed that you have off on Thursday, April 7th in order to work on your paper. You don't have off from Santa Fe entirely, you just have off from my class. So the next time I will see you is Tuesday, April 12th with your papers in hand. Here's what you need to do. First step. We've talked about the importance of evaluating evidence for a claim at length. Think long and hard about why it is important to evaluate evidence. As an introduction to the rest of your paper, write a paragraph neatly combining these reasons, your reasons. Return to your text, but do not lift from your text if you need a refresher. Beginning with a related quote, scene, or example would be excellent, but not required. Your introduction is worth 15 points. Let's take a look at an example introduction. Here's what the introduction would look like if I wrote it. Obviously, yours will be different, but I just want to give you accurate expectations of how to envision this assignment. One of the most important steps in analyzing an argument is evaluating the evidence presented for the claim. If the evidence is weak or missing, the claim loses credibility. If the evidence is strong and well presented, the claim gains strength and potentially momentum. As critical thinkers, it is important that we make this distinction so as not to fall prey to false claims stemming from biased agendas. To be truly autonomous beings, each of our thoughts, each of our beliefs, each of our values ought to be a choice reliant on sound reasoning rather than an accident of persuasion. Indeed, as philosopher David Hume concisely stated, a wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. Okay, so what I tried to do in that example of an introduction is follow these guidelines pretty closely. In other words, write a paragraph neatly combining the reasons that I have gathered from our conversations in class, from what we've read in the text, why evaluating evidence is important. Okay? And if I needed to sort of gather up those thoughts and pull on some information to write about, I could return to the text without lifting anything from it, because that's plagiarism, and you'll fail not the paper but the class, so be careful. Or what you'll notice I also did was I just looked up evidence online and I pulled a quote that I was able to end my introduction with. This is not required, but it's a good writing technique that people sometimes use to increase the creativity and the interest of their writing. You could also, as your author does, write about a scene, a scenario in which someone did or didn't evaluate evidence and how that relates to why you think it's important to evaluate evidence. That would also serve as a good introduction. Okay? Moving on. The body of your paper will focus on a comparison of Tannen and Copeland's use of evidence. Look back at your charts for each author. Move systematically through the articles and write a thorough analysis of the use of each piece of evidence. Use the categories on your charts as a means to examine each study or expert. Make sure to provide proof that supports your analysis in the form of quotes from each text. We'll take a look in just a second at the example paper and how the body, at least the beginning of the body, tries to meet these requirements. Before we do that, the body of your paper, as you can see, is worth 100 points. It also asks you to talk about each piece of evidence. When we looked at Tannen, she used 6 different experts, or 6 different pieces of evidence. When we looked at Copeland, she used 5. So you will have at least 11 paragraphs. Some of them may be longer than others, some may be shorter than others, because some of the pieces of evidence are rather small and there may not be all that much to say about them. But there are at least 11 pieces of evidence, and you need to make sure that you address each one of them. Let's take a look at how the example paper starts that process. As an example of the different ways evidence can be used and abused, we read and analyzed 2 articles in class. In the first, Deborah Tannen claims that the socialization of children in separate gender groups influences the communication difficulties adult men and women confront in marriage. In the second, Libby Copeland claims that Facebook and other social media which invite comparison of ourselves to others can be damaging to our overall sense of happiness and well-being. Both authors cite several sources of evidence for their claims, but each presents her evidence in very different ways. All I've done in that paragraph is made a link from my introduction to my analysis. Now the next paragraph will focus on Deborah Tannen and her first piece of evidence. Deborah Tannen damages her credibility right off the bat by dropping in a sentence that sounds credible and important, but upon further review reveals itself to be void of any relevance. She states, "The pattern was observed by political scientist Andrew Hacker in the late 70s. First, Hacker is a political scientist. Tannen is discussing gender, communication, and marriage. His field of expertise is not relevant." I'm going to stop right here to explain a little bit about what I'm doing in this paper. So, first of all, notice that I pulled a direct quote from Tannen's article. When you use words directly from a source, it must be in quotations, otherwise it is plagiarizing. It's good to use direct quotes to illustrate the arguments that you're making. I don't just say the sentence reveals itself to be void of any relevance. I illustrate how and why, just like we did in class, that particular sentence isn't relevant. I give reasons and examples. First, second, lastly. Okay? So I am using analysis and basically just following the chart to demonstrate the point. All right, moving on. Second, Hacker discovered the aforementioned pattern in the late 70s. Tannen's article was written in 1990. Much about gender roles and communication could have changed in the decade and a half between Hacker's study and Tannen's writing. Lastly, we do not even know that Hacker conducted a study, or if he did, how it was conducted. Tannen gives us no further information about Hacker or the evidence he provides for her case, but instead moves on to her next expert in the very next sentence. Why even include this sentence about Hacker? Perhaps to establish false credibility? Whatever the reason, it is a poor use of evidence and a poor way for Tannen to begin. In contrast, Libby Copeland begins her article by giving background information about a battery of studies conducted by Stanford psychology PhD student Alex Jordan. Okay, let's stop for a little bit of explanation here. So I've gone through my first piece of evidence for Tannen and each of the columns in our chart, which talked about field of expertise, date of publication, focus of the research, and I've used each of those columns to address that piece of evidence and to explain why it's either good or bad, strong or weak. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing for Libby Copeland's first piece of evidence. You do not need to structure your paper exactly like this. I have chosen to go Tannen, Copeland, Tannen, Copeland, Tannen, Copeland, back and forth. If you want to do all of Tannen and then all of Copeland, that's entirely up to you. Both would result in a compare-contrast paper. Both would be perfectly fine structures. You can make your decision about how you want to structure your paper. To continue. This evidence stands up to each of the criteria we were taught to look for in our analysis. First, the study is published in a reputable journal, the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. Notice that I didn't just stop after saying it was published in a reputable journal. I provided evidence from Copeland's article, the title of the journal, in order to back up that point that I tried to make. Second, the study is timely and relevant to the writing of Copeland's article, as they both occur in January of 2011. There's my proof. Third, Copeland is citing an expert whose field of study is relevant to her claim. Alex Jordan is a psychology PhD student, and her claim revolves around mental states such as mood and happiness. Lastly, in terms that the reader can understand, Copeland briefly explains how each study was conducted and the way in which the results support her claim. For instance, she explains that subjects underestimated how many negative experiences their peers were having and overestimated how much fun these same peers were having. Later, Copeland connects this finding to Facebook by pointing out that most people only post positive information about themselves, contributing to the false image we may interpret. Copeland even goes above and beyond, critiquing her own evidence. This is correlation, not causation, mind you. It could be that those subjects who started out feeling worse imagined that everyone else was getting along just fine, not the other way around, she states. Additionally, Copeland includes both sample size and example responses, giving a clear and thorough picture of the research conducted and how it supports her claim that Facebook may have a negative impact on our mood. She does all of this while maintaining the mood and language of a popular article rather than the sometimes dense writing one might find in an academic journal. Tannen's next example comes from blah, 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 blah. I've cut off the paper here because I've given you 2 example paragraphs, and you'll have to come up with the rest on your own. I understand that our analysis of Hacker is going to sound similar. I understand that our analysis of Tannen's evidence altogether is going to sound similar because we did that analysis together in class. But you analyzed Copeland, or you should have analyzed Copeland, on your own, so that's where I expect to see the bulk of your original thoughts and your original analysis. Let's go back to the assignment sheet and see what our next task is.